Hello and welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm Nancy Cordes. Well, you could call it President Obama's fiscal pickle as analysts and pundits break down the nation's larger financial problems over the next decade. Earlier today, Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner and Budget Director Peter Orszag testified before Senate committees answering questions about the budget's record $1.56 trillion deficit. In Congress, Republicans are calling this new budget a recipe for disaster, while Democrats defended the decision to drive record deficits even higher in order to enact measures aimed at lowering unemployment. Joining me to discuss all of this in a roundtable discussion today are Democratic consultant Taylor West and Alex Conant, a Republican strategist and former spokesman for the Republican National Committee. Thanks so much to both of you for being with me. And Alex, I'll start with you. The White House says this budget is a necessary evil. They love to try to bring down the deficit right away, but that the economy is still in a very difficult position, and this is not the year to do it.
Well, that's what they said last year, too, when we had the original stimulus plan, which is part of the reason why spending is so out of control right now, why the deficit is at such historic levels. They said we need to spend all this extra money to keep unemployment from going above 8%. Now it's at 10%, and they say, you know what, we need to spend even more money. Meanwhile, we have GDP, or the deficit is at about 10%, over 10% of GDP, completely unsustainable levels. It needs to be down to at least 3%, or at best balanced. But instead, they have no plans to balance the budget for over the next 10 years. It's completely unsustainable. We need to take much more dramatic action to get our fiscal house in order than the White House is proposing.
Taylor, your thoughts? Republicans say that the Democrats have no plan to bring the deficit and the debt under control.
Well, Nancy, first of all, let's talk about how interesting it is to hear the Republicans suddenly concerned about deficits after 8 years of deficits not mattering that got us into this pickle in the first place. But I think you said it in your intro. We are in a position right now where we do have a historic deficit that we need to bring down. We also have a very difficult economy, and one of the ways that we can get job creation going is by investing in the things that help spur that job creation. So I think the president has created a budget that focuses on both of those priorities. He is investing in the things in that budget that are going to help drive small business job creation, which we know is the engine of our country's economic growth. But there are also quite a lot of economic and fiscal responsibility measures, such as the spending freeze that he announced last week. So look, I don't think the president or any of the folks around him wanted to be in the position of having a record deficit created by 8 years of irresponsible spending by Republicans and the Bush administration. But given that we're in that situation, we're taking the best possible measures to both create jobs, spur the economy, and get us back on to a track of fiscal responsibility.
So let's talk about some of those measures that the president is proposing to help small businesses get back on track. In specific, that $30 billion going to small banks so that they can extend credit to small businesses. I know that the Republican Party is very concerned about small businesses, talks about them a lot, talks about Main Street. Is this a good idea?
Well, I think you're right. The Republican Party does think that the government needs to be doing more for small businesses, more for entrepreneurs. The best thing they could do is keep the Bush tax cuts in place, which keep taxes low on entrepreneurs, on people that might start small businesses. But, yes, the president's like rolling out all these, pro-jobs, small business tax incentives. If these were such good ideas, why didn't he propose them a year ago? I think you're saying.
So are you saying that you want the president to do things for small businesses unless it's something that the president is suggesting, and then it's not a good idea?
No, and the Republicans are going to work with them. I thought that the meeting that they had last Friday was a good first step. Republicans have been proposing a lot of ideas over the last year on how to create jobs, and frankly, the White House just hasn't been paying attention. Now they have to pay attention because they lost the Massachusetts Senate race. The voters have sent a very clear signal that they want more bipartisanship. They want a more moderate agenda. Republicans are ready to offer some ideas.
But this would not be in your list of ideas.
No, I think it's absolutely something we should look at. Absolutely, yeah.
Taylor, I want to ask you about that. Alex makes a good point that definitely after this election in Massachusetts, the president and the Democratic Party are pivoting, finally, some would say, to focusing like a laser on the economy. Is it too late? Can they get back this mantle of really caring about the economy and jobs before the midterm elections roll around?
Well, let me dispute your first point a little. I'd say one of the very first things that the president and Congress did when he took office last year was pass an important piece of stimulus legislation that did help get our economy back on track. And now a lot of Republicans like to attack that. But the fact is that it has brought us back from the brink in a way that it would not have if we had not done that. Now, having said that, absolutely, the big concern right now is jobs, as it should be, and that is why this budget is focused so clearly on stimulating small business. And you know, Alex can sort of poo-poo these ideas if he wants, but the fact is that we're talking about major tax credits for small businesses that are creating jobs and increasing wages. And when he talks about the Bush tax breaks that are going away, these are the tax breaks that were only the ones targeted at the nation's wealthiest people. We're rebalancing the tax code. We're giving middle-class Americans increased child care tax credits, increased help when it comes to putting their kids through college. We're increasing education budgets. You know, these are all investments towards growing the economy in the long term and boosting small businesses, just like we talked about.
I'm curious from both of you, it seems like the deficit and the debt in this country has, over the past few months, become a really central issue for a lot of Americans, as it wasn't for quite some time. I mean, the deficit and the debt have been very high for many years, so it comes as no surprise. Why do you think that now suddenly Americans are growing very concerned about where we stand financially?
Well, in part because while the deficit has been too big for too long, it's been nothing like it has been in the last year or two since President Obama took over.
Well, but wait a minute, isn't that more because of the economy and...
Well, it be what it may, the president has dramatically increased spending so that the deficit is now over 10% of GDP, which is unprecedented since World War II. When President Bush was in office, the deficits ranged around 3, 4, maybe 5% of GDP.
But most economists say that that's because we're in an economic downturn, and so
yeah, but that's why people
this president has proposed measures in the long term for starting to bring that deficit down, which is not something we saw out of the last 8 years.
Well, no, that's not
President
true at
Obama.
all. Actually, the deficit was on a downward plane. Then the economic recession hit in the fall of 2008, and then the Democrats took over and dramatically increased spending. So you have the revenue going down, you have spending going up. That's going to create a huge deficit. The president wants to continue monster spending for as far as the eye can see. That's why the deficit and the debt is such a long-term problem that needs to be tackled aggressively.
That's just not true. The president has been very clear that he has a long-term plan that involves freezing spending at levels where it currently is, and that's an important piece of deficit reduction. But we also have to spend a lot of money to clean up the mess that came out of Republicans supporting every ounce of Wall Street's irresponsible activities.
That's right. It's all Bush's fault.
I think it's fair enough to say that there's a lot of blame to go around, but I guess the question that I'm asking is not so much who's to blame, but why do you think that there is a mood in this country right now where, you know, I think if you asked people a year ago, what are your biggest concerns, they'd say health care, you know, they'd say the war. I don't think that the debt or the deficit would be, you know, one of the first few items on that list. And I think if you asked people today, they would say, I'm really concerned about the deficit. And I'm just curious, you know, not from a Republican or a Democratic point of view, but why you think that is. Taylor?
Nancy, I think part of it is an overall concern about the financial structure of our economy as a whole. And part of this is people are very angry about a perceived unfairness in the fact that we got into a position where we had to bail out banks who were acting irresponsibly. And I think people are really focused on the economy and the fiscal situation because of that anger. Now, I think the deficits are a part of that, but I also think that's why things like getting the banks to take responsibility for their role in this and having them repaying money to the government that we use, that taxpayers had to use to bail them out, is going to be an incredibly important piece of our fiscal policy moving into the election.
I actually have a slightly different answer to that.
Sure.
You know, I think that families and small businesses are pulling back during these tough times, and they look at the federal government, and state budgets are pulling back, but then you look at the federal government and it's spending more and more and more. It's not pulling back at all. And it's just common sense that this is not sustainable. So I think that folks back home, you know, folks on Main Street are looking at the federal government spending and say, look, I can't afford this, my state can't afford this, businesses can't afford this, certainly the federal government can't afford this either. And then you look at the really frightening numbers that have been dominating the headlines for the last couple of weeks in terms of the deficit projections, completely unsustainable, and with all due respect, President Obama has no serious plan to bring the budget into balance in the next decade.
And yet it's such a push and pull, isn't it, right? I mean, if one of those people who's sitting at home is a teacher or a policeman whose job was saved because the federal government spent more on their state, then and they're probably pretty glad that
Absolutely.
the federal government is spending right now, right?
Now, and I think it's a really important point you make, Nancy. There's no question that people sitting at home want to see that the government is being responsible with the money, and that is something that the president has been focusing on very much. At the same time, we need to be boosting and creating jobs in this economy, and that's what has been happening in this budget. But it is absolutely true that Americans understand that there's such a thing as a budget that you can afford and a budget that you can't, and that's why the president has identified billions and billions and billions of dollars in his budget of cuts, while not cutting to the bone the very things we need to get our economy back on track.
Look, the president said when we started this massive spending binge last spring, he said this spending is going to keep unemployment at 8%, and said now it's over 10%, and the economy is not getting better if you're sitting at home and worried about your job. You were worried about your job a year ago. You're still worried about your job.
The GDP is turning around, right?
We had one good quarter.
Right.
Nobody thinks that level is sustainable.
And that's why we need to support these small businesses in creating jobs, and that's exactly what we're doing here.
Right, but then you're going to raise taxes starting next year. That doesn't make any sense if you want to continue to grow the economy over the long run.
We're not raising taxes on the middle class here.
On small business owners, sure you are, and that's why people are so worried about their jobs in the long run. Never mind that unemployment is still at 10%, and no matter, even with these optimistic economic growth projections that the White House has, the deficit is still out of control for the next decade. It's not sustainable. They need to make some harder choices than they've already made.
Well, it's really a tough situation and an unprecedented economic situation, and everyone seems to be really at odds over what the best approach is. But I really appreciate both of you coming on to help us hash this out because it is a difficult topic. Taylor West and Alex Conant, thank you both so much for being with us.
Thanks, Nancy.
Sure thing. And moving on now to the 2010 census. Starting in March, Americans will receive forms in the mail to fill out, providing basic information. It's not optional, it's mandatory. Why is this once-a-decade census so important? Well, first of all, the appointing of seats in the House of Representatives is at stake, as is the allocation of $400 billion in federal spending. This is especially important in providing representation and funding for growing Hispanic communities throughout the U.S. And joining me now is actor Wilmer Valderrama, a member of Voto Latino. Wilmer's here in Washington to meet with House lawmakers and unveil a new campaign urging Hispanics to take part in the census. Wilmer, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So you're heading to Capitol Hill tomorrow as part of Voto Latino. Tell us a little bit about your mission.
Well, Rosario Dawson and I started this amazing campaign last year to register and people into voting and inspiring the youth to understand that voting was really important. The organization's mission wasn't over there. We knew that the census were coming in 2010, and that was a very, very, very important thing for the community to embrace. So, we produced another PSA that was a very informational, conversational, that just triggered the conversation about how important the census are, and the elements that can be behind it that people are not aware of, and the myths behind it as well.
When you're out in Hispanic communities, do you get the sense that there is some reluctance to participate in the census?
Yeah, there's a lot of misguided conceptions. That for that generation, it's not even in the land community. I think that in general, the general public has this interesting point of view on the census and what they mean to the community. That's why I think that this year they've really simplified it. They made it only 10 questions, very simple questions about the community and their family in general. It makes it really simple for people to understand that there's no necessarily secret agenda behind it.
Right, and yet the Hispanic community has, in particular, a lot to gain from participating, right? Yeah,
because as our numbers keep growing, we need to be aware of who and where is everyone in the communities. I think that's one of the most important things about the census is that it really kind of just somehow unofficially and directly dictates the funding of a lot of our public services, like for example schools and hospitals. Depending on how many people are in that area, that's kind of how we distribute our funding. And I think that that's something really important for everyone to know. And if the land community can really embrace that, then we understand how to find the right representatives for our community. And I think that that's something that's really important for us as well.
And what's your message going to be on Capitol Hill? What are you trying to convince lawmakers to do?
Basically, for us as entertainers, the most important thing is to really embrace the entertainment platform to just kind of inspire people and put that information out there, and then somehow in entertaining form and in an effortless effort to really have them, understand how important this is. So it's really kind of creating this partnership and figuring out what are really, our not only our boundaries, but what our obstacles are when it comes to getting this information out. So we're kind of lending our entertainment platform to carry on some of these agendas.
Do you feel like the younger population in the Hispanic community is more receptive to your message about getting out there and participating in the census?
Yeah, and I also think that this young generation has grown up with a whole different level of definitions and theories, and freedoms that maybe some of us missed maybe even 3 years before they started. So it's been really great to see how inspired and how and their sense of leadership, for the young community, which it's been amazing to see how much they take a stand, and it's great because they're the ones who are really educating the grown-ups on these myths and misguiding thoughts of the census.
What do you tell them is in it for them?
Well, for them, they're basically going to be their community leaders. They're going to be, their own consumer. They're going to be their own, their own corporate. So they're the ones who need to understand what their own reforms are, and most importantly, what do they need to carry on their own personal agenda for their next generation, which I think is the exciting part, to come in this early and having them understand how important it is for them to get involved now. So
you're a busy guy. You've got shows in production. What is it that inspired you to get involved and at this level?
A number of things. I was been really blessed and to really. I tell you, it all started with a simple movie. I did a movie called Fast Food Nation, and Richard Linklater and Eric Schlosser brought me here to Capitol Hill to talk about immigration and talk about the myths of that as well. And I was able to understand that with my career, I had an opportunity to make this an organic extension of what I can do. And I don't really mess with too many politics or anything, but I think that when it comes to the community and the immediate public, I think that's something that us as entertainers have the ability to convey and to really understand, since we are so in touch with our fan bases and in understanding what we need as community as well. I think that's just in general, and the fact that we have a voice to be able to come out here and raise some of this awareness it's great. It's exciting. It's great to be part of that next wave of people that can talk about these things.
Right, and you've got so many platforms now with Twitter and Facebook. There's so many ways to reach out to people that don't necessarily require a ton of time or even a ton of travel to
and that's
get involved.
And that's really the big message, and to every artist out there, and every public, every person that's in the public eye, they should understand that it's become so easy to get your voice heard and so easy to inspire people through all these media outlets, and I think that that's really our next agenda is how do we get the community to feel they have that same opportunity and that they have the same platform as we do.
Well, Wilmer Valderrama, actor and now political actor as well.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for being with us. It's really inspirational, and good luck on Capitol Hill.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And that's it for Washington Unplugged today. Thank you for joining us. I'm Nancy Cordes. You can catch us here every day at cbsnews.com. See you later.